Now that the Formula One race in China or the Chinese Grand Prix is behind us, there are 9 things that we learned from this particular race in China. And in this particular video, I want to share with you those 9 things, or I want to share the observations that we made when it came to the Formula One race in China. The first one is that McLaren had a disaster over weekend in China. And this was especially worse on Sunday because McLaren did not even start the race. And I don't think there is a time when McLaren have had a bad start to a season like the one they are having in 2026. In Australia, Oscar Piastri did not even start the race. He crashed out of the race even before the race had started. In China, at least they actually had a race during the sprint race, and because of technical issues which they have come out and say that are related to the engine or the power unit, they were unable to actually start the race on Sunday. And this is what you might consider to be a very bad start of McLaren when it comes to defending their titles in 2026. Because the more they have these issues, the more they are losing points. And they are going to have a very difficult time trying to catch up to the leaders Mercedes and Ferrari. The second thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is, again, Ferrari are extremely fast when starting the race. And I think this confirms something that had already been talked about during, the preseason testing, whereby it seems Ferrari had a solution when it comes to actually having race starts. And it is coming out clear that this was an issue that they had raised in 2025, telling FIA that there would be a problem when it comes to race start given the new regulations. It turns out that, they were dismissed. And now that the season has started, I think everyone is starting to realize that there was wisdom in listening to Ferrari, because other teams are having a problem when it comes to race starts. But Ferrari seems to have a solution to it, and while maybe it compromises other areas because of them having a smaller turbo, it gives them an edge when it comes to race starts. Of course, this is giving them an advantage and actually giving them an opportunity to take the lead away from Mercedes, who seems to always be on pole this particular season, at least so far. But while they can be able to start the race very well, Ferrari still have a deficit when it comes to, to having the speed to catch up with Mercedes. And they are losing out after a few laps. But at least this is a good indication that if they can be able to solve that deficit that they have to Mercedes, then it can be very interesting to have at least Ferrari versus Mercedes fighting for the championship, where the two teams are on equal footing when it comes to either the power or the ability to actually lead and actually win races. If this is the first time that you and I are meeting, I am Joe, and on this YouTube channel I talk about Formula One and the business of Formula One, and I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. The third thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is that Mercedes still remains the team to beat. They are extremely good, and it is unbelievable that even at this particular point, we are almost saying that they are going to win both the championships. And of course, you may not know how the rest of the season is going to actually evolve, but as of now, Mercedes are the team to beat. And it was good that it was the first time Kimi Antonelli had a race win. And I think all of us actually loved to see Kimi winning his first race. He is the youngest driver to do so. And it was very emotional even when he was being interviewed, which is a kind of a wholesome experience when you see the human side of the Formula One drivers, especially when they have been able to score what many of us would say are, very important wins as part of their career. But at the same time, Mercedes also showed a sign, of a reliability problem, because George Russell almost never took part in the last rounds of qualifying because he had an issue. And while they were able to sort it out and he still secured P2, at least that was an indication that maybe they are not bulletproof. They can still have an issue over the course of the season, and I hope they don't, but at least it's something that can happen. But that also indicated how good they are. That George can go from not even being sure whether he'll take part in the last rounds of qualifying to actually securing P2 with what you might consider to be not a well-optimized car. That demonstrates how good Mercedes also are, because if they can be able to do that with a car that is not necessarily good, then you ask yourself what would have happened if George Russell's car was good. Probably would have been on pole and even won the race. We'll never know. But at least Mercedes seems to have an edge over the rest of the grid. The fourth thing that I learned, and that you may have picked during the Chinese Grand Prix, is that Aston Martin seems to be running these initial races more of like an extension of their pre-season testing. And this is understandable because Aston Martin had the worst pre-season testing. They did not have kind of laps, they did not get enough laps to even be able to understand the car that they have built. And I think it makes sense that, the Australian Grand Prix, the sprint race, and the Chinese Grand Prix provided an opportunity for Aston Martin to continue testing the car that they have built. And if it showed signs of weakness when it comes to vibrations, but the vibrations were so bad to a point where, Fernando Alonso is said to have even released the steering wheel as he was, racing. It continues to show that at least they are willing to continue testing the car that they have built, to continue understanding themselves, and probably also coming up with ideas on how to solve some of the problems that they have. It will be very interesting to see how they perform during the Japanese Grand Prix, which is basically the home race or the home ground of Honda, who are providing Aston Martin with the power unit. The fifth thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is that Red Bull are struggling. And I think that is something that is very clear at this particular point, and 2 races with a sprint race already into the season. Red Bull are not at the same level as they have been in the past, and I think there are a number of factors playing into that. One is that this is the first year where they are a manufacturer, and probably there are a lot of things that they need to learn, and maybe there are a lot of teething problems that we cannot even understand. But at the moment, it seems that they are unable to get on top of the car that they have been able to build, to the point of even, Max Verstappen not finishing the race in China, which has not happened for a while and continues to compound the problems that they are in. You cannot ignore the fact that, Red Bull is a top Formula 1 team, and they can be able to turn around the situation very quickly, which is something that many would expect, and even, fans of Max Verstappen would want the situation sorted out quickly. But the question is whether that is actually doable in this particular season when there are so many moving parts, especially given this is a new year with new regulations. But it is the hope that, Red Bull can be able to sort this out, and we can start having, Red Bull and Max Verstappen competing on the front of the grid, which would, add to the spice when it comes to the Formula 1 races. The sixth thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is that there were 7 drivers who did not finish the race. And this was because of various reasons, among them being reliability concerns. And of course, a lot can be said about this particular issue as to whether these new cars can actually continue having these problems over the course of the season, whether there will be more, DNFs and DNSs over the course of the season because of the current regulations, and whether the regulations are the ones that are leading to all these, drivers not finishing the race because maybe their cars and what teams have been able to create are not working. So there's a great deal of conversation about this because I don't think it's actually also good to have 7 drivers not finishing a race because of things that are probably beyond themselves. It's not, like a driver error. It's more about the cars and probably how they are behaving given these new regulations. But I hope that can improve, and maybe we will not be having so many drivers not finishing the race as we move forward. The seventh thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is that Cadillac F1 team, this being their first year on the grid, is actually doing very well. With both drivers finishing the race, I think that is something that is worth celebrating, because Bottas finished P13 and Sergio Perez finished P15. And that in itself should be a win for Cadillac, because this, you can consider it to be the second full race for them being in this particular season. And the fact that they can have their cars, complete an entire race, that is something that is actually very good news. At least they should be able to look at it as, a foundation on which they can continue building the project that they have and making it competitive as the season progresses. The eighth thing that we learned from the Chinese Grand Prix is that Haas F1 team continues to be the lead team when it comes to the midfield. And it is very good to see Oli Bearman and Esteban Ocon driving pretty well, to the point that at this particular moment, Haas is actually the lead team when it comes to the Constructors' Championship when you are looking into the midfield teams. And that's a very big step coming from previous seasons where Haas was actually not seen as a very competitive car, which means that Ferrari, who are supplying Haas with the power unit, have done a very good job. But of course, Haas themselves have been able to create a car that can be able to compete in the front of the midfield, and that's a very good thing. And hopefully they can continue doing that, and they will not take any step backwards as the season evolves. The ninth thing that came out during the Chinese Grand Prix is the fact that the Bahrain Grand Prix and the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix will actually not be taking place in April. And this is because of the cancellation that happened due to the issue or the situation that is emerging and that is continuing in Middle East, with the teams unable to even get into those races because of, the region becoming a no-fly zone, and also a lot of, risk that would be involved when it comes to racing in those two countries. The FIA, the F1, and the organizers of those races agreed to actually cancel those races. Of course, this is not good news to Formula One fans and even the Formula One community, but I think this was the right decision to ensure that there is safety of everyone who would be involved. Financially, I don't know who is going to take the hit, whether it's the organizers or Formula One, but at least it's something that is not very good when you lose two key venues that would generate good revenues for your business. And with the Chinese Grand Prix now complete, the Formula One Championship in 2026 are starting to take shape, with George Russell leading the Drivers' Championship and Mercedes leading the Constructors' Championship. George is leading with 51 points, ahead of Kimi Antonelli, who is at 47 points, who is ahead of Charles Leclerc at that 4 points, Charles who is ahead of Lewis Hamilton at that 3 points, and Lewis ahead of Oli Bearman, who is the 5th driver at 17, topping up the top 5 drivers in the championship so far. After the Chinese Grand Prix, Mercedes is leading the Constructors' Championship with 98 points, ahead of Ferrari, who have 68 points, who are also ahead of McLaren, who are third with 18 points, who are ahead of Haas in fourth, who has 17 points, and Haas being ahead of Red Bull, who are fifth with 12 points. This is going to be it from me in this particular video, and I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not, and I'm going to see you in my next video.